A middle-aged man is in trouble with his boss. He has helped himself to his employer's funds one too many times, and now he is facing the music. In fact, he has been told to clean out his desk. He is given a few days to clear up his accounts, but he knows that after that he is finished. The man is humiliated. He knew that at his age in life, it would not be easy to find another job, particularly at the pay scale of his old job. He probably could keep going on a while on unemployment benefits, but what about after they ran out? He was facing financial disaster. Then he hit upon an ingenious plan. He was in charge of collecting debts owed to his employer. He decided that he would call each of his debtors in and offer them a deal. He told them that he would be leaving his present position to search out new opportunities. And in order to keep their goodwill, he was offering them a deal that they just couldn't be able to refuse. If they paid their bills immediately, they could settle for 60 cents on the dollar. Of course, he assured them, with his fingers crossed, that he has been authorized by his employer to make them this offer. And he hoped they would remember this act of goodwill when he came to their company to submit his resume. He used his boss's money to buy the goodwill of his possible future employers. This is the parable of the shrewd servant in a modern setting. Now, did this man do wrong? This question brings us to the problem of this morning's text. Why did Jesus pick this man to be an example? The most common features of our Lord's parables are their shock value. They surprise and startle, and this parable certainly does that. Let's look together at the parable of the shrewd servant. And Sydney, could you do me a favor and read verses 1 and 2?
Jesus told this story to his disciples. A rich man hired a manager to handle his affairs. But soon a rumor went around that the manager was thoroughly dishonest. So his employer called him in and said, "What's this I hear about you stealing from me? Get your report in order because you're going to be dismissed."
The lesson from Luke this morning comes to us in the form of a parable. Depending on the biblical translation you read, the story is about a rich man and his servant, or manager, or steward, who was wasteful, incompetent, dishonest, or shrewd. Parables are short stories with a lesson attached, not actual history. Because they are parables, interpretation can sometimes be difficult. And this parable is especially hard. Struggling with this parable can make you feel like Jacob when he wrestled all night long with the heavenly messenger on the banks of the river. But like Jacob, if we are diligent and refuse to give up, there is blessing to be found. A steward in that day was a trusted servant. usually someone born in the household who was chief of management and distribution of household provisions. He provided food for all the other servants, thus managing his master's resources for the well-being of others. He acted as an agent for his master, with full authority to transact business in the master's name. The steward is to use that which has been entrusted to him to further his master's interest and not his own.
Amen.
It would seem, though, that the temptation was too great for this man, and he began to divert funds for his own purposes and pleasures. Not surprisingly, it is not too long until his master finds out about what he is doing. His master summons him and asks for an inventory of his goods and an audit of his books. In modern terms, he was told, "Give me all your records and clean out your desk. You're fired." We don't know how this rich man acquired his wealth. Was it hard work? Maybe. An inheritance? Possibly. The product of unscrupulous business practices? We're not really told, although some commentators believe that this fellow was charging interest to his customers, which was a clear violation of Mosaic law. We read this in Leviticus 25:36, where it says, "Take thou no usury of him, or increase, but fear thy God, that thy brother may live with thee." This rich man's manager was accustomed of wasting his possessions, skimming off the top apparently, although again, some commentators suggest that maybe this guy wasn't charging customers what the boss told him to charge because he knew the price was too high. Later on, however, the manager is called dishonest. So I guess we have to go along with the notion that this fellow had a character defect, just like we all have. For all have sinned and have fallen short of the glory of God. Romans 3:23, which is page 976 in your pew Bibles. The rich man had a manager who was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, "What's this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer." He got fired, canned, laid off, downsized, whatever you want to call it. He was done. Apparently, however, this manager received some sort of severance package or something. He wasn't fired on the spot, but was given a few days to get his affairs in order. The manager said to himself, "What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses." So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?"
800 gallons of olive oil.
He replied, the manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 400. Then he asked the second, and how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat. He replied, he told him, take your bill and make it 800. So now we have an out-of-work, middle management executive who is faced with the loss of income. He doesn't know how he is going to feed his family, keep his wife in new clothes, send the kids to college, and pay for that sporty new 2-hump camel he just bought. He has too much pride to become one of those dirty beggars who line the streets. He has never done a day's worth of manual labor in his life and doesn't care to start now. He is in a real conundrum, but he is not stupid. He decides to go to his boss's customers and strike a deal with them. He reduced the olive oil distributor's obligation by 50%. The farmer who was in debt for wheat saw that obligation reduced by 20%. He did this by figuring that if he scratched their backs, they would scratch his. If he helped them so they would help him, he helped them so they would help him when he needed it. There are a couple possibilities here. Either he was subtracting his own commission as a way of reducing those bills, but that would mean that he wasn't dishonest, or that the debtors did not know that he had been fired. If that was the case, then they thought that these discounts were legitimate and would have been very pleased. The master commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. The end of all this is that the rich man comes out smelling like roses. If he had been charging unlawful interest, then his neighbors would praise God that he had found salvation. If he were simply a tough-edged business owner, then his debtors would have thanked him for his generosity. Either way, he looked good. Of course, there was no choice but to praise and commend his manager for his shrewdness, which had paid huge dividends. It is important to realize that nowhere in this parable is the dishonesty of the manager lifted up for special acclamation. Nowhere is it suggested that this deceitfulness and corruption are commendable courses of action. Nowhere is this fellow praised because he is too lazy or incompetent to change careers in midstream. It was really interesting when I checked the thesaurus to see that the word shrewd had a number of synonyms: astute, sharp, on the ball, smart, perceptive, insightful, wise, and clever. These are all positive adjectives. It is the ingenuity of the steward that is praised. It is his shrewdness that is admired. He set a goal and reached it. He had a plan and worked on it. He pursued an end with all the creativity and energy that he could muster. What's that say about Christians? We like to say that our Christian faith is the most important part of our lives. We like to say that we intend to live for Jesus each and every day. We like to say that the most important institution in our community is the church. We like to say that is our Christian faith which provides us guidance and counsel that get us through the day. But think about it for a minute. Do we pursue our relationship with Jesus Christ with the same energy as this dishonest manager? Do we have the same sort of devotion to the cause of Christ as we have for earning a living? Does it come as a shock to you that you are a steward, and as a steward you don't own anything? You may possess many things, but you do not own them. God does. In what respects are Christians stewards? Obviously, as suggested by today's text, we are stewards of our material possessions. If you would turn to page 1015. Ephesians 5:15 and 16.
See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil.
So we are stewards of our time. Margie, 1 Peter 4:10.
As each one has received a gift, minister it to one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God.
So we are stewards of our gifts and abilities. John, could you read for me? Page 1022 in the Pew Bible, but it's 1 Thessalonians 2:4.
But as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, even to so we speak, not as pleasing men, but God who tests our hearts.
So we are stewards of the gospel as well. For the dishonest manager, nothing was more important than achieving his goal. Is there anything in our everyday lives which becomes more important, or at least more urgent, than our relationship with Jesus? It seems to me that the parable of the dishonest manager ought to give us pause and urge us to take an inventory of the things which occupy our greatest levels of energy. I think it probably ought to make us stop and consider just how much of our prayers, presence, gifts, and service we are willing to give for the sake of our Lord. If we discover that we are much more willing to devote energy to things which are not of ultimate consequences than we are to the Lord of our lives, then perhaps we ought to ask ourselves, what are we going to do about it? Are we willing to, if I might borrow a phrase from Oswald Chambers, give our utmost for his highest? Are we willing to give everything we have for an encounter with the living Christ? Are we willing to concentrate our energy on a meeting with Jesus? I am convinced that heaven is waiting for our answer.